If you're feeling overlooked and underappreciated at your church, we're going to look at a passage today in 1 Timothy that I hope will encourage you and give you some helpful perspective. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Right now, I'm going to attempt to examine the Bible and dissect some of the churchy language we can easily take for granted, digging into history and languages, as much as I'm able anyway, to try and get at the heart of the text so that we can hopefully see and then apply at least some of what God has for you and me in these words today. Now, I'm not formally trained in Scripture. I'm just a guy using resources and a questioning mind to try and get at the truth, and that's something that we can all do, so I hope you'll do that with me. We're making our way through 1 Timothy. We've arrived at chapter 3, looking at verses 9 and 10 in the ESV that says, "They must hold the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience, and let them also be tested first. Then let them serve as deacons if they prove themselves blameless." Okay, so context. These verses are continuing to describe the minimal qualifications for those serving as deacons in the local church. As I mentioned last time, the term deacon broadly means servant and seems to have been a catch-all of the early church in some sense to describe those in various roles and degrees of delegated authority that serve and even lead in some cases in the church under the oversight and authority of the elders. So, looking at verse 9 to start, they must hold the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. That phrase, mystery of the faith, I found very interesting, wanted to for sure dig into that. Well, the Greek word translated as mystery here was used to refer to knowledge that was known, so not as much today like we would say, oh, that's a mystery, it's not known. Well, this Greek word was used to refer to stuff that was known, but by a much smaller group of people rather than being common knowledge. The Greek word for faith here almost certainly refers not to one's personal confidence in the things that they believe. When I talk about like my faith, the strength of my faith, that kind of thing, not that sense, but rather to the collected content of truths and doctrines believed by Christians. So the phrase mystery of faith could also be understood as the deeper, less-known truths of Christian teaching, that they're to hold to these things with a clear conscience. That's what deacons must do. In looking into this idea of with a clear conscience, it seems it could refer to a personal confidence one has, or, and I lean in this direction a bit more of the options, a clear conscience before God and people. I think the middle road concept that would maybe be inclusive of both would be someone who is transparent and genuine in their belief, not someone who presents themselves as more confident than they are or with a stronger and truer faith than they actually have. Someone who is solid in their faith and what they believe and not keeping up appearances, as it were, to give a good but false impression of themselves. Okay, so verse 10. And let them also be tested first. So first, we want to establish that this is someone who has an understanding of the deeper matters of faith, and that that's genuine. They're not putting up pretense. That they're stable and solid in that. So once we think that they're that kind of person, next, verse 10, let them also be tested first, then let them serve as deacons if they prove themselves blameless. So in what way should church servants be tested first? That's an interesting idea. The answer is, I think, in the end of the verse, which all but says the purpose of being tested, which is to prove themselves blameless. So whatever this test is, that's the goal, is to prove themselves, to prove these potential deacons blameless. Now, the Greek word for blameless here does not mean blameless before God's judgment, but before humans. In other words, they are unable to be rightly accused of wrong in their community by people who know them. The concept of being tested here refers to being examined and scrutinized to test and approve the genuineness of something. So deacons are first to be examined to confirm that they are above blame among other people who know them. Now, this doesn't seem to refer to some sort of particular or formal testing procedure. In whatever way would be effective, a deacon should be scrutinized, presumably by elders, to determine if they are a person of integrity and without cause for blame from other people. And depending on the type of servant role being considered, the weight of influence and responsibility it carries, this testing, I think, would appropriately look different. This could today involve a formal interview for some kind of volunteer or paid staff position. It could involve a temporary posting to a position or role in the church, again, volunteer or paid staff. It could involve a period of getting to know someone relationally and in different contexts, or any combination of those things or other things that would serve that same role of really examining them. Couple of examples. Many years ago, when I served as the worship pastor at my church for a couple of years, I was first interviewed somewhat informally because I'd been on staff at that point for 2 years under the worship pastor before me. And so I was known by some of the elders because of that role, and also just being at the church, being involved in music ministry, in the college group, for several years. So there was since I'd been going to the church since I was starting high school. So I was known by some of the elders for several years, and so maybe that's why that initial interview was somewhat informal. But even at that point, I was made the interim director of music and worship. It was just kind of a temporary posting to kind of like see how this goes and to give them a chance to examine me. And after 6 months of that, and also filling out a lengthy questionnaire, and I shared my responses to a very similar questionnaire a couple years back. Before I joined the elder board at the beginning of 2024, I had to fill out a very lengthy questionnaire about my life and being open about my sin and my weaknesses, my strengths, my belief about particular things and doctrines. It's very lengthy. It took a long time to fill out. Well, something similar along those lines I filled out before as a part of this interim process. And then I had a more formal interview with the lead pastor, who was one of the elders. And then I was also interviewed by the entire elder board at one point. And it was after all of that I was given the role of pastor of music and worship, which was a deacon equivalent at our church, not an elder equivalent. Now, a different example of deacon at our church would be, I think, my wife, Holly. She has led worship regularly for the women's ministry at our church on and off in various seasons of life for the last 20 years. This started with her leading some songs and playing guitar on Sunday mornings, just kind of one member of the band kind of thing, and then being asked to put together a worship set now and then and lead at like a women's event, like a women's retreat or some kind of special women's one-off gathering kind of thing, and then eventually being asked to lead the worship at each Tuesday morning women's ministry gathering, and to oversee that in some significant ways, and even delegate to other people, or schedule other people to themselves pick out songs and lead and stuff like that. So it really gradually, her involvement in worship ministry of various activities and things on our church campus grew over time. She has never worked on church staff, been a part of the church staff. She's never had any kind of official title, still does not. But despite that, she really today is functionally one pillar of the worship ministry at our church, and especially the women's worship ministry, though she would deflect or blush to hear me say that, because that's a fairly weighty and influential place that she's found herself in now. And there was never a formal interview. She didn't fill out a questionnaire. She just served faithfully and was gradually and organically offered more responsibility and opportunity. But I think she is very much functionally a deacon. So as we process this as geeks, as we think about our relationship to our church, as potentially stepping into certain roles that would have increasing influence, whether that's a formal title or an informal thing that just organically gets shaped and reshaped into various things over the years, I think there's some things, given some of our traits that not all of us have, many of us don't. But there are some traits that are common to a lot of geeks that really came to mind as I was processing the idea of a geek stepping into a deacon, a functionally deacon-type role in their church. As geeks, we often have a very active thought life. We might not express those thoughts. We've probably got a lot more going on in our heads than actually makes it out of our mouths in words. And so we may develop good and godly vision for ways that we could serve and influence in our local churches. But because we imagine so much possibility, we can tend to get ahead of ourselves. And when others don't see our potential the same way that we do, that can be discouraging. On top of that, our tendency toward insecurity can make us really uncomfortable about the idea of being scrutinized and examined for the purposes of evaluation. That is an intimidating thing to think about for me. Even having been through it for various roles at my church, various times, still when I think about the idea of being evaluated, scrutinized and stuff, it's like that's not a comfy feeling for me. And yet, if our churches are appointing people to roles biblically, they're trying to do that biblically, looking at a passage like this one, then we should expect a period of examination, getting to know us more deeply, being given the responsibility of less weighty tasks for a time. Even if we've known the leaders for a while and they us, and we feel like they should know me, they should know that I'm good for this, well, they may know us in one facet or it's multiple facets of our personality, of our wiring, but there's still some others that because they know the role, they know some things that we don't about what could come up, what could happen when we're serving in this potential role that we're thinking of. They still may need to get to know other aspects of our wiring, other facets of us, and how we respond in different situations that would be relevant to the role that we're being considered for. All that to say that as geeks, we sometimes feel overlooked and underappreciated. And unfortunately, sometimes we are, very unfairly. But other times, it's because we haven't been in the right circumstances for the people to see the particular things necessary for them to determine if we're an appropriate fit for what we have our eyes on. And so we should expect and be patient with a time, maybe a longer time than we'd like, of evaluation. Once we've communicated, and we got to do that, once we've communicated our ideas for how we could serve. And while waiting, we also have reason actually to be grateful for that waiting, grateful that it's taking some time, because it's often an indication that we are at a church that is trying to responsibly, biblically safeguard its health and its people. And that's a really good thing. All right. What do you think of that? Tell me how that's striking you. What are you pondering right now? Let me know in the comments. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.